Hi guys, today we are going to find out, what if the Beatles never formed? You're standing on Matthew Street in Liverpool, 1962, but the Cavern Club echoes with jazz instead of screaming teenagers. The cobblestones glisten with rain as you realize John Lennon never met Paul McCartney at that fateful church fete. You watch John trudge past in a gray suit, briefcase in hand, heading to his job at Prudential Insurance. His dreams of rock stardom died when his mother Julia's accident left him too devastated to pursue music. Meanwhile, Paul McCartney sits in St. Peter's Church Hall, teaching scales to bored 7-year-olds on a battered upright piano. Without John's rebellious spark, Paul's musical ambitions withered into respectability and steady income. George Harrison works at his father's bus depot, his guitar gathering dust in a bedroom corner. Ringo Starr drums in dingy pubs for Rory Storm, never imagining anything beyond weekend gigs. You probably won't survive realizing how 4 missed connections changed the entire trajectory of human culture. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where this alternate timeline finds you today. Now sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You step into the smoky Kaiserkeller Club in Hamburg's red light district, but the stage thrums with German rockabilly instead of Merseybeat. Without the Beatles' electric energy igniting the Reeperbahn, local bands like the Rattles dominate the scene completely. You watch Astrid Kirchherr photograph leather-clad German musicians, her artistic eye never discovering those distinctive mop-top haircuts. The club owners book safer acts, polka bands mixed with American covers, keeping their audiences predictably satisfied. British musicians remain unknown quantities here, never proving they can electrify continental audiences with raw energy. You observe how Hamburg's music scene stays insular, missing the cultural cross-pollination that once sparked innovation. The Cavern Club's reputation never reaches German promoters, leaving Liverpool's sound completely unexplored territory. Stuart Sutcliffe continues art school in Liverpool, never joining a band or falling tragically ill in Hamburg. Pete Best drums for local groups that never venture beyond Merseyside's boundaries. You witness how the British-German musical connection that launched 1,000 careers simply never materializes. German rock clubs remain content with their established formula, unaware they're missing history's greatest cultural export. The Reeperbahn's neon lights reflect the same faces night after night, lacking the fresh British invasion. You realize Hamburg's clubs become footnotes in music history rather than launching pads for global superstars. You walk through Abbey Road Studios in 1962, but George Martin sits behind the mixing desk producing orchestral arrangements for Cilla Black. His classical training remains focused on easy-listening albums and comedy records, never challenged by 4 demanding Liverpudlians. The revolutionary studio techniques that would define modern recording, backwards vocals, tape loops, orchestral overdubs, remain undiscovered innovations. You watch Martin methodically conduct string sections for forgettable ballads, his creative genius lying completely dormant. EMI's Studio 2 echoes with traditional pop arrangements instead of groundbreaking experimental soundscapes. The 4-track recording equipment sits underutilized, never pushed beyond its conventional limits by ambitious young musicians. Jeff Emmerich continues as a junior engineer, never developing the innovative microphone techniques that revolutionized recording. You observe how the studio's famous echo chambers remain tools for standard reverb rather than creative manipulation. Martin's collaboration with orchestral arranger Ron Goodwin produces competent but forgettable instrumental albums. The Mellotron gathers dust in storage, never becoming the psychedelic centerpiece of revolutionary compositions. You witness how Abbey Road's reputation stays confined to classical recordings and BBC radio jingles. Without the Beatles demanding impossible sounds, studio innovation stagnates for decades longer than history remembers. The legendary Studio 2 remains just another recording room rather than rock music's most sacred creative space. You're sitting in Ed Sullivan's CBS studio on February 9, 1964. But Dean Martin croons to swooning middle-aged women instead. The screaming teenage audience never materializes because British rock remains completely unknown to American television producers. You watch Sullivan's talent scouts returning from London empty-handed, reporting nothing but amateur skiffle groups worth importing. Capitol Records continues focusing on Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole, never bothering with unsigned British acts. The American music industry stays insular, convinced that rock and roll peaked with Elvis and Chuck Berry. You observe how radio stations maintain their strict playlists of established crooners and girl groups. Without the Beatles proving British bands could conquer America, the entire British invasion simply never happens. The Rolling Stones remain a London club band, never securing American record deals or international fame. You witness The Who playing empty pubs in Shepherd's Bush, their explosive energy wasted on indifferent local crowds. American teenagers continue buying Motown and surf rock, never experiencing the raw power of British rhythm and blues. The cultural bridge between Britain and America remains unbuilt, leaving two music scenes developing in complete isolation. You realize how one missing television appearance kept an entire generation from discovering their musical identity. Ed Sullivan's Sunday Night Stage showcases safe variety acts, while revolutionary music goes completely unnoticed across the Atlantic. You enter a 1967 recording studio where engineers still use the same techniques perfected in 1955. The revolutionary multi-tracking methods that would define modern music remain locked away in untested possibilities. You watch producers layer simple overdubs, never imagining the complex sonic landscapes that creative desperation might inspire. Studio experimentation stays confined to adding basic reverb or doubling vocal tracks with conventional microphone placement. The innovative use of unconventional instruments, sitars, mellotrons, backwards orchestras, never enters mainstream recording consciousness. You observe how the psychedelic sound revolution simply doesn't happen, leaving rock music harmonically predictable. Producers continue working within established formulas, never push to invent entirely new recording paradigms. The concept of the studio as creative instrument rather than mere documentation tool remains completely foreign. You witness how sound effects, tape manipulation, and electronic processing stay relegated to experimental composers. Phasing, flanging, and other effect techniques wait decades longer for accidental discovery by curious engineers. The idea of spending months perfecting a single album seems absurd when most records finish in 3 days. You realize how technological advancement slowed dramatically without four perfectionist musicians demanding impossible sounds. Recording budgets remain modest because nobody imagines that studio time could become an artistic medium itself. You find Bob Dylan in a Greenwich Village coffeehouse, still strumming his acoustic guitar to small folk audiences. Without the Beatles' electric transformation inspiring his own evolution, Dylan remains purist folk's most celebrated troubadour. The revolutionary going electric moment at Newport Folk Festival never happens because Dylan sees no successful precedent. You watch him perform Blowin' in the Wind for the 1,000th time, his repertoire trapped in acoustic authenticity. His poetic genius continues flourishing, but the sonic landscapes that would amplify his words remain unexplored territory. Folk music maintains its rigid traditionalism without Dylan's electric rebellion legitimizing genre-crossing experimentation. You observe how protest songs stay confined to acoustic guitars and harmonicas, missing the power of full band arrangements. The folk rock fusion that launched countless careers simply doesn't exist, keeping acoustic and electric scenes completely separate. Dylan's backing band, the Hawks, never forms because there's no call for folk musicians with rock sensibilities. You witness how his most revolutionary period, the Electric Trilogy of albums, remains unwritten and unrecorded. Folk festivals continue their purist approach, never experiencing the shocking moment when tradition meets amplification. The counterculture movement lacks Dylan's electric anthem Like a Rolling Stone to unite rebellious youth worldwide. You realize how one artist's creative leap required another's pioneering example to break through conservative musical barriers. You walk through Haight-Ashbury in 1967, but the summer of love feels more like autumn melancholy. Without the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper providing the psychedelic soundtrack, the counterculture movement lacks its unifying musical heartbeat. Young people gather in Golden Gate Park, but their rebellion expresses itself through folk songs and jazz rather than revolutionary rock anthems. You observe how the hippie movement develops around Eastern philosophy and protest, missing the transcendent musical experience that once bonded generations. Flower power exists, but without All You Need Is Love broadcasting globally, the peace message spreads more slowly and quietly. The generation gap widens differently when parents and children don't share the common language of Beatles melodies. You witness how youth culture fragments into smaller scenes, folk purists, jazz experimentalists, blues revivalists, never unified by one dominant sound. Woodstock still happens, but the festival showcases regional acts rather than internationally recognized superstars with generational anthems. The Cultural Revolution proceeds through literature and activism, lacking music's emotional catalyst to ignite mass transformation. You watch how fashion, art, and lifestyle changes occur gradually without synchronized musical moments marking cultural shifts. Drug experimentation continues, but without psychedelic rock soundtracks, the experiences lack their soundtrack-defined mystical narrative. The concept of a global youth culture remains fragmented when different regions develop completely separate musical identities. You realize how four harmonizing voices once provided the emotional soundtrack for humanity's most transformative decade. You enter a 1975 recording studio where progressive rock bands still sound like jazz fusion experiments gone wrong. Without the Beatles pioneering the concept album format, musicians struggle to create cohesive, long-form musical narratives. Pink Floyd remains a psychedelic jam band, never developing the architectural song structures that would define stadium rock. You watch Led Zeppelin stuck in blues rock patterns, missing the orchestral arrangements that once elevated heavy music into art. The idea of rock as serious artistic expression develops decades slower, without Sgt. Pepper proving albums could be unified statements. Synthesizers remain novelty instruments rather than essential tools, because no one demonstrated their melodic potential in popular contexts. You observe how guitar effects stay primitive, basic distortion and reverb, without innovative producers pushing sonic boundaries. The wall of sound production technique never evolves beyond Phil Spector's girl group arrangements into rock sophistication. Progressive bands create lengthy compositions, but they lack the harmonic sophistication that once made complexity accessible to mainstream audiences. You witness how album covers remain simple photographs rather than artistic statements reflecting the music's conceptual ambitions. Studio orchestration stays confined to string sections rather than exploring the full symphonic potential of rock arrangements. The concept of the rock opera exists in theory but lacks successful precedents to inspire confident execution. Rock music's intellectual credibility develops more slowly without landmark albums proving the genre's artistic legitimacy to critics and academics. You walk into a 1980s record store where the single still reigns supreme over album sales. Without the Beatles proving that albums could be artistic statements, the music industry remains focused on individual hit songs. Radio stations continue their top 40 format, never developing album-oriented rock programming that once educated listeners about deep cuts. You observe how record labels invest minimally in album production, knowing consumers only care about the potential hit single. The concept of the album artist never develops, leaving musicians trapped in the 3-minute song format indefinitely. MTV launches but struggles to fill programming because most bands lack cohesive visual identities or album concepts worth exploring. You witness how compact disc technology arrives but offers little advantage when most music consumption centers around individual tracks. The revolution in home stereo systems stagnates because there's no demand for equipment capable of reproducing complex album-length sonic journeys. Music criticism remains focused on singles reviews rather than developing the vocabulary to analyze complete artistic works. You watch how the album format becomes synonymous with filler tracks, since no one demonstrated how to craft cohesive, full-length experiences. Concert tours remain short because artists lack sufficient material for extended performances without album-length repertoires to draw from. The intimate relationship between artist and fan never deepens beyond hit songs, missing the personal connection that complete, artistic statements once fostered. You realize how the entire economic structure of the music industry developed differently when albums remained collections, rather than unified artistic visions. You arrive in today's music landscape where streaming algorithms struggle to create cohesive listening experiences from fragmented song catalogs. Modern pop music lacks the harmonic sophistication that once elevated 3-chord progressions into transcendent musical moments. You observe how contemporary artists remain trapped in verse-chorus structures, never learning the advanced songwriting techniques that 4 Liverpool lads pioneered. The art of melody writing suffers dramatically without the Beatles' mathematical precision in crafting unforgettable hooks and counter-melodies. Studio production remains surprisingly primitive, missing decades of innovation that creative collaboration between artists and producers might have achieved. You witness how modern bands struggle to create unified album experiences, lacking the template that once showed how individual songs could serve larger artistic visions. The relationship between popular music and classical orchestration never fully developed, leaving rock arrangements harmonically simplistic. Today's music industry operates on completely different economics, built around individual track consumption rather than complete artistic statements. You watch how social media creates instant fame, but lacks the sustained cultural impact that carefully crafted musical movements once generated. The concept of generational anthems doesn't exist because no single band ever demonstrated how music could unite diverse audiences across cultural boundaries. Modern recording technology offers infinite possibilities, but artists lack the creative framework that boundary-pushing experimentation once provided. You realize how today's musical landscape, while rich in diversity, misses the unifying thread that four harmonizing voices once wove through human consciousness. The question haunts every streaming playlist. What heights might human creativity have reached with just one more spark of collaborative genius? You close your eyes and let the silence settle around you, imagining the echoes of songs that never were. In this alternate timeline, humanity's soundtrack developed along quieter, more fragmented paths, missing that singular moment when four voices harmonized perfectly. The butterfly effect of one missed meeting, one different decision, rippled through decades of human creativity and connection. Music still evolved, artists still created, and generations still found their anthems, but something ineffable was lost in translation. Perhaps it's the mathematical precision of melody meeting raw emotional honesty, or the way certain harmonies can instantly transport millions of strangers to the same emotional place. Without that shared musical language, cultural movements fragmented differently. Youth expressed rebellion through scattered voices rather than unified choruses. The absence shaped everything. Studio innovation crawled forward instead of leaping. Albums remained collections instead of artistic statements, and the bridge between popular and sophisticated music was never fully built. Yet in this quieter world, other forms of art flourished more prominently. Literature and cinema, perhaps filling the emotional void that four Liverpool voices might have occupied. The human spirit for creativity and connection remained unchanged, simply channeled through different rivers toward the same eternal ocean of artistic expression. What other creative partnerships never formed? What other sparks of collaborative genius remain hidden in history's shadows, waiting for their moment that may never come?